the dawn of Christianity, a man named Marcion challenged the prevailing views of the time, declaring something unimaginable. The God worshipped by the Church was not a benevolent and creative figure, but rather one who controlled humanity in harsh ways. What if this idea was more than just an audacious theory? How could such a realization transform everything we believe about the sacred? Premonition Channel explores these profound questions and the legacy of figures like Marcion, offering fresh insights into the history and evolution of spirituality. Marcion's revolutionary perspective. Marcion's interpretation of the divine was groundbreaking in the context of early Christianity. He argued that the God of the Old Testament, often depicted as vengeful and punitive, was not the same entity as the compassionate, loving God revealed through Jesus Christ. This idea led to a significant departure from mainstream Christian doctrine, which had typically sought to reconcile these two seemingly contradictory aspects of the divine. Marcion's dualism, a sharp division between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, invited further theological debate. In addition to his rejection of the Creator God, Marcion's followers also believed that the material world, created by this vengeful deity, was inherently flawed. This view, echoing aspects of Gnostic thought, positioned the world as a prison from which humanity must escape, with Jesus as the liberator. Radical opposition to sacred narratives. Marcion's critique of the sacred texts was not just theological but also ethical. His questioning of biblical events, such as the destruction of the firstborn in Egypt, the flood, and the command to sacrifice, suggests a moral contradiction between the actions attributed to the Old Testament God and the ethical teachings of Jesus. These radical objections to the prevailing understanding of God's actions played a crucial role in the development of Christian apologetics, as defenders of the faith had to find ways to reconcile these apparent inconsistencies. The emergence of Marcionism therefore forced early Christians to engage more deeply with their sacred texts, ultimately leading to a more systematic approach to biblical interpretation. Marcion's doctrine and the conflict between Creator and benevolent God. The heart of Marcion's theology was the conflict between the Creator God and a higher, benevolent God. Marcion saw the Creator as a deity obsessed with control and domination, creating a world that was hostile to humanity. In contrast, the benevolent God embodied qualities like love, grace, and forgiveness, and Jesus was the embodiment of this superior deity. Marcion's doctrine thus positioned the New Testament as the only authentic Christian scripture, excluding the Old Testament entirely. His Gospel of the Lord was a reworked version of the Gospel of Luke, edited to remove what he saw as the influence of the Creator's wrath. The spread of Marcionism and its influence. The Marcionite movement gained considerable traction, particularly in regions where the early Christian church struggled with internal divisions. Marcion's teachings offered a clear, compelling vision that attracted many, especially those disillusioned with the complexities of early Christian theological debates. According to historian Bart D. Ehrman, Marcion's impact on Christianity was immense, pushing the church to define its canon and distinguish orthodoxy from heresy. While Marcion's movement eventually declined, it left an indelible mark on the history of Christianity by challenging the canonization of the Old Testament and influencing later theological developments. The challenge of the Gospel of Judas. The rediscovery of the Gospel of Judas in the 1970s offered new insights into early Christian heterodox thought. This Gnostic gospel, which presents a radically different portrayal of Judas Iscariot and his relationship with Jesus, has drawn comparisons to Marcion's views on the Creator and the Supreme God. The Gospel of Judas suggests that Judas was acting on Jesus' instructions to betray him, positioning the act not as a betrayal, but as a necessary step in God's plan. Such ideas resonate with Marcion's notion of a higher, more transcendent God opposed to the vengeful Creator, further complicating our understanding of early Christian theological diversity. Marcion's practices beyond theological debate. Marcion's community practices were equally radical. His rejection of the Old Testament's dietary laws and the embrace of a fish-based diet as a symbol of purity were not merely symbolic, but also practical expressions of his theological stance. These practices mirrored his broader rejection of the physical world created by the Creator, reinforcing the idea that spiritual purity could only be attained by distancing oneself from the material world. Marcion's views on gender roles were also progressive for the time, with women playing significant leadership roles in his communities. This challenge to the patriarchal structure of the early church made Marcionism even more appealing to those seeking an egalitarian faith. Marcionism's legacy and modern implications. Marcion's ideas, though ultimately branded as heretical by the mainstream church, have had a lasting influence on both historical and contemporary Christian thought. His radical challenge to the nature of God and the Christian canon instigated a deep and ongoing theological debate about the diversity of early Christian beliefs. Marcion's rejection of the vengeful Creator and his advocacy for a benevolent, loving God resonate with many modern scholars, spiritual seekers, and progressive Christians who continue to explore his ideas. In the modern era, his views have found a new audience among those questioning traditional interpretations of divine justice and seeking a theology that emphasizes love, compassion, and inclusivity. The rediscovery of ancient texts such as the Gospel of Judas and the Nag Hammadi scriptures in the mid-20th century has further illuminated the rich diversity of early Christian thought, which was often suppressed by the orthodoxy that emerged as Christianity became institutionalized. These texts, many of which reflect Gnostic and Marcionite themes, have challenged the historically dominant narrative and provided new perspectives on Christian origins, sparking renewed interest in alternative Christian teachings and their implications for spirituality today. Furthermore, in modern theological circles, Marcion's ideas have been revisited in discussions on the evolving nature of Scripture and its interpretation. Scholars examining the early Christian canon often point to Marcion's selective canon as a precursor to the later, more formalized process of determining which texts would be included in the Bible. This makes Marcion's influence on the shaping of Christian doctrine more significant than it might initially appear, as his challenge to the canon helped to solidify the boundaries of what was considered Orthodox Christianity. Marcion's role in shaping the first Christian canon. Marcion's contribution to the formation of the Christian canon is often overshadowed by his eventual condemnation, but it remains a pivotal moment in the history of Christianity. His insistence on a selective canon directly shaped the way early Christians thought about the authority of Scripture. Marcion rejected the entire Old Testament and instead compiled a collection of 11 books that aligned with his theological perspective. This canon consisted of an edited version of the Gospel of Luke, which Marcion had revised to remove any references to the Old Testament God, and 10 letters attributed to the Apostle Paul. These works, carefully chosen to support Marcion's dualistic view of God, helped define what he believed to be the true Christian message. Marcion's Canon was a radical attempt to distill the Christian faith into a coherent narrative that centered solely on the teachings of the higher benevolent God as revealed through Jesus Christ. By excluding texts that did not align with this view, such as the Hebrew Scriptures and any writings that glorified the Creator, Marcion sought to separate the New Testament's message from what he saw as the oppressive and tyrannical figure of the Old Testament God. While his canon was ultimately rejected by the broader Christian community, his approach to defining sacred Scripture influenced later discussions on what constituted authoritative Christian texts. Marcion's insistence on Scripture as a tool for theological clarity would contribute to the development of Christian canon formation in the centuries that followed. Opposition from early church leaders. Marcion's theological innovations led to strong opposition from early church leaders, many of whom saw his teachings as an existential threat to the unity of Christian doctrine. Prominent figures such as Tertullian and Irenaeus vehemently opposed Marcion's separation of the Creator God from the bond of Jesus Christ. For them, Marcion's dualistic interpretation was not only incorrect, but dangerous, as it undermined the integrity of Christian teachings and divided the narrative of God's work in the world. Tertullian, one of the Church's most articulate defenders of orthodoxy, accused Marcion of promoting a dangerous heresy by dividing God into two antagonistic figures, one a wrathful Creator and the other a merciful Father. He argued that Marcion's teachings distorted the Christian faith and overlooked the continuity between the Old and New Testaments. Similarly, Irenaeus, in his work Against Heresies, argued that the Creator and Jesus were not distinct, but part of a unified divine plan. According to Irenaeus, Marcion's radical views could not be reconciled with the apostolic teachings, and as such, his ideas were heretical. Marcion's Canon, which excluded the Old Testament, was also seen as a direct challenge to the unity of Christian scriptures. By setting himself apart from the early Church's canon, Marcion presented an alternative to the Church's emerging tradition, which would eventually lead to the formulation of the Bible as it is known today. Marcionism and the early Church's response. As Marcion's teachings spread throughout the Roman Empire, the early Church found itself forced to respond to the challenges posed by his radical ideas. In areas where Marcionism had gained a foothold, it sparked debates about the nature of God, the authenticity of Christian scriptures, and the relationship between the Old and New Testaments. Marcion's Canon and his rejection of the Creator God forced the Church to examine and defend its beliefs, leading to the development of a more formalized Christian doctrine. Church leaders like Tertullian and Irenaeus not only refuted Marcion's theology, but also worked to solidify the concept of a unified Christian scripture that incorporated both the Old and New Testaments. In doing so, they effectively laid the groundwork for the future development of the Christian Bible. Their responses to Marcion's ideas also helped to define what was considered orthodox Christian teaching, which in turn influenced later Christian debates over the nature of God, the authority of Scripture, and the legitimacy of alternative gospels and teachings. The Church's response to Marcionism had profound implications for the future of Christian theology. By rejecting Marcion's dualism and reinforcing the continuity between the Old and New Testaments, the early Church established the theological foundation that would dominate Christianity for centuries. Marcion's radical challenge, though ultimately suppressed, forced the Church to confront difficult questions about the nature of God and the scope of Christian teachings. The Gospel of Judas, a window into Marcion's worldview. The discovery of the Gospel of Judas in the 1970s offered an intriguing glimpse into the theological landscape of early Christianity, with ideas strikingly similar to Marcion's teachings. In this controversial text, Jesus speaks of a hidden and superior God, a force of infinite love and wisdom entirely separate from the Creator of the material world. The Gospel of Judas presents a Gnostic perspective on Christianity, emphasizing the idea that the physical world and its Creator are flawed, while salvation lies in transcending the material and connecting with a higher divine truth. Marcion, who similarly rejected the Creator God, would have found much resonance in the Gospel of Judas, as it aligns with his vision of a God of pure love and mercy, distinct from the tyrannical deity of the Old Testament. Barbelo, the immortal realm in the Gospel of Judas. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Gospel of Judas is its depiction of Barbelo, an immortal, pure realm that contrasts sharply with the material world. Barbelo is portrayed as an ethereal, untouched dimension of spiritual freedom, representing the ultimate refuge from the corruption of the physical world and the oppressive rule of the Creator God. This idealized realm is emblematic of the Gnostic vision of divine truth, an eternal space beyond the reach of the material realm and its corrupting forces. Marcion's worldview, which positioned the Creator as a malignant entity, would have found its fullest expression in such a realm, where the soul is freed from the physical world's constraints and reunited with a transcendent, loving God. The Gnostic understanding of divine freedom. The Gnostic rejection of the Creator God, as seen in the Gospel of Judas and in Marcionism, presents a profound challenge to traditional Christian theology. It portrays the Creator as a being whose actions, ranging from the creation of the world to the infliction of suffering, are inherently flawed, and whose rule over the material world must be overthrown for true spiritual freedom to be attained. The Gnostic message is one of liberation from the chains of fear, oppression, and dominion, offering the seeker an opportunity to reconnect with a pure, more loving God. In rejecting the authority of the Creator, Gnosticism invites individuals to seek divine truth within, offering a spiritual path that emphasizes personal enlightenment over institutionalized religious authority. The Gnostic Revolution and the Quest for Inner Truth. The Gnostic Revolution, which Marcionism both embodied and contributed to, represents a fundamental shift in how individuals sought truth and spiritual freedom. Gnostics believed that knowledge, gnosis, was the key to transcending the limitations of the physical world and the tyrannical Creator. This inner truth was not found through adherence to external religious laws or rituals, but through personal experience and enlightenment. This idea has found echoes in many contemporary spiritual movements, which emphasize self-discovery and the search for a personal connection with the divine. By rejecting external religious authority and focusing on inner transformation, the Gnostic path offers a counterpoint to traditional religious structures, encouraging a direct, intimate relationship with the divine essence that transcends the limitations of worldly power and control. Today, the ideas of Marcion and the Gnostics continue to inspire spiritual seekers who challenge fear-based control systems and embrace personal empowerment. In many modern spiritual practices, the rejection of external authority in favor of self-discovery mirrors the Gnostic critique of the Creator God. These movements encourage people to connect with their higher selves and explore new paths of personal transformation.